USDA logo, United States Department of Agriculture.
Hey, welcome to our Hot Topics in Ag and Food Law 1 hour speaking event. We're really looking forward to what Harrison and Laurie have to share today. So we're glad you could join us today. My name is Kirsten Nelson. I'm the Senior Law Librarian at the USDA National Agricultural Library, or as we call it, NAL, and the coordinator of the Agricultural Law Information Partnership. The NAL building sits on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people. Please take time to consider the land you are on, actions that honor Indigenous people, and consider the legacies of violence and displacement that brought us together today. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal of Indigenous people from this territory. We realize these nations ceded significant portions of their land, forming present-day Washington, D.C. and surrounding areas in inequitable and unfair treaties. We pay honor and respect to the elders, past and present, and future leaders. We recognize the need for sovereignty of Native nations in this territory and beyond. At NAL, our mission is to facilitate the creation of agricultural knowledge through the acquisition, curation, and dissemination of information and data needed to solve agricultural challenges. Located in Beltsville, Maryland, NAL houses one of the world's largest collections devoted to food, agriculture, and related sciences. We are committed to contributing to the advancement of agriculture, and we're thrilled to have you join us in our mission. The Agricultural Law Information Partnership was established in 2014 and is a collaboration between NAL, the National Agricultural Law Center, and the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at the Vermont Law Graduate School. The partnership connects consumers, legal professionals, policymakers, and producers with agricultural and food law information. Today's event will feature two speakers, Laurie Beyranevand, the director of the Center for Ag and Food Systems at the Vermont Law Graduate School, and Mr. Harrison Pittman, director of the National Ag Law Center in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Following the speakers, we will have a short Q&A session for about 10 minutes. During the session, if you want to put questions into the comment box, we will monitor those and we will ask those at the end. This is scheduled to run for 1 hour, and we will do that Q&A at the end. So now I'm going to turn it over to Harrison Pittman. Oh, I forgot about the disclaimer. Just as a reminder, we are recording this event today. We will turn the recording off during the Q&A session. So just so you're aware that we are recording. And I think I kind of covered the agenda. So now I'm turning it over to you, Harrison.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. And Kirsten and Laurie and Glenn, it's great to be here with you. So I'm going to do my level best to stay within 20 minutes. I tried to do just under 20 slides with an idea that I could do a minute or less on each one. So we'll see how it goes. And I certainly look forward to questions that you have. If you put those in the chat box, and certainly you can reach out anytime after this. I'm more than happy, and our staff is to help in any way we can. Do I change the slides, or do I simply ask someone?
You can say next slide, and Jamie will advance it for you.
Okay. All right. I think that was the next slide. I'm not sure. So a little bit about the National Agricultural Law Center. The center was created by Congress in 1987. Just think back to the context at that time. We were still in the midst of the farm crisis of the 1980s. And you had all these stakeholders around the United States that really didn't have access to information, particularly agricultural law information. So you had producers and government employees, lenders, and a whole long range of individuals and businesses. And so that's where the idea came from, was to create an objective, nonpartisan resource that could be independent and be a resource to all of these interests, sometimes which were competing with each other. Our mission is to serve as the nation's leading source for agricultural and food law research and information. Administratively, we're headquartered in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We are part of the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. So Fayetteville's the flagship university in the Arkansas system, and in the land grant part of that. And the Division of Agriculture is agricultural research and extension throughout the state of Arkansas. We are partnered with the USDA Agricultural Research Service National Agricultural Library. For those of you who are familiar with that, in the early days, in the 1980s, when the center was created, the National Ag Library was a standalone agency. And so that's where that relationship was and obviously remains. In the Reorganization Act in the mid-1990s, NAL became a component with ARS. A key feature of the Ag Law Center, you can go to the next slide, is that we are stakeholder driven. I mentioned just 2 or 3 of them a moment ago, but basically everybody that's interested in ag law, that's a stakeholder to us. Some are more common than others. You see a list there from USDA to the Farm Credit System, attorneys, non-attorneys, and I'll let you just read that list there. But we work with all those folks on a daily basis, and I'll walk through some highlights here. Next slide, please. In next slide. Oh, no, don't know. I mean, not next slide. I'll walk through that in just a moment. So in terms of being stakeholder driven, for those of you who are interested, and I'll put a link to this in the chat box when I'm done speaking, we are conducting a national survey right now, and it should take less than 10 minutes to take. It's about 15 questions online, and we take that information. It does shape our future research and information activities, and we want to hear from a wide range of people, from media to folks at USDA, those in the librarian community, attorneys and non-attorneys of all walks of life. And so we've started just to publicize this pretty heavily, and would appreciate anybody who can take the time to tell us how we can be of best service to you through this survey. Next slide, please. All right. So if I was doing a full presentation on the Ag Law Center, we would go for sure an hour or more. So I'm just hitting some highlights. And so we do have a lot of partners, some of which are on this call with Laurie and Kirsten and Jamie at NAL. We have partnerships with the USDA Office of General Counsel, the National Association for State Departments of Agriculture, both NASDA and the NASDA Foundation. They're 2 different entities technically. Next slide, please. And, of course, NASDA is the umbrella group for all the state ag departments around the country. We have other partners. The 4 that are listed here are partners that we actually, we have a direct collaborative working day-to-day relationship with, and funding that is appropriated through the annual appropriations process in Congress. We do subcontracts to these partners from the bottom right, my bottom right, Iowa State University, the Center for Agricultural Law and Taxation, Penn State Law, they have a Center for Agricultural and Shale Law, the Ohio State University, got to throw that "the" in there with them. They have an agricultural and natural resources program. Those are 3 institutions who they have an ag law outreach component that historically was focused just on like particular issues and mostly geographically for people in those states. So we leverage their expertise in helping us fulfill our national mission. So, for example, with CALT, they hire additional staff so that it increases their ability to do outreach to stakeholders in Iowa, but also it increases their ability to collaborate with us. And we have annual work plans quarter by quarter. And then finally, our newest partner is the Southern University Law Center. SULC is one of 6 historically Black colleges and university law schools in the United States, and they've created a new institute in agricultural law that's really just now in its first 1 year or so. It starts in earnest getting that launched. And so that's exciting. Next slide. I think I have one more about partners here. Just we won't need to spend much time, but these are some other folks that we collaborate with, and these are just some examples, and it's most of the partners that we formally collaborate with. Next slide, please. So I mentioned Congress created the center in 1987. The April 13th, 1988 would be the other real date, if you're really looking at the beginnings of the center. And that was the date that the original cooperative agreement was signed and entered into between NAL and the National Agricultural Law Center. And what you see on your screen, I won't read all those off. I'll let you just pick out the one or two you'd like to pick through. But they reflect what the vision of the center was from its very beginning and what it does now. To establish a national clearinghouse for systematic collection, indexing, and publication of agricultural law information. Back then, that was a lot of materials that would go into a library, like a physical library, and we'd use interlibrary loan. Even when I started in 2001 at the Ag Law Center. But today it's our website, and then we have a whole apparatus that comes around it, some of which I'm going to touch on. To provide support to educational programs in agricultural law in the land-grant universities and in other institutions of higher education. We still do that to this day. All these things that are mentioned here, and you see that language: timely, neutral, international, state and federal research, all of the agencies, members of Congress, farmers. Those are our everyday stakeholders. Next slide, please. This is just a listing of several of the types of issues that we deal with, but again, on an everyday basis. It might be things on hunting leases, increasingly carbon contracts, or more broadly, carbon markets, all manner of environmental law issues in agriculture, like waters of the United States, wetlands compliance, other areas that some of you may have encountered, particularly during the pandemic, the meat processing laws at the state level. That really ramped up. We do other things like ag finance and credit, basically how the money works in agriculture, and Article 9, bankruptcies, agricultural liens, and the list goes on and on. Next slide, please. I've mentioned our website, that you can see the domain address there. And if you haven't been to it, I encourage you just to go and click around. You'll get a pretty quick idea of just the breadth of the types of issues we cover and how we cover them. We do design the website and everything that we do, frankly, to really be useful to non-attorneys as well as attorneys, because we serve both of those audiences as stakeholders. And we also are a resource to people who are experts already in a subject matter, as well as maybe they're just getting started. They might be a student doing maybe they're in FFA or 4-H or Junior Manners or Agriculture for America or other youth ag organizations. And they need to do some research to do a public speaking. We do Zoom calls and emails and with all those folks, in addition to the resources that they can just readily access on our website. In terms of traffic, I do have more recent numbers. I just wasn't talented enough to update the slide in time. But you get the idea here. Our website's pretty heavily trafficked. We get increase year over year, roughly about 20%. The average over 365 days in calendar year 2022 was just under 800 a day. So that doesn't count people that come, in the unique visitor count, that if they come, whatever that pattern is, if they come more than once within a 10 or 20 or 30 day period, they don't count that repetitively. And so it's a pretty heavily trafficked website. Next slide, please. Types of outreach and presentations. So we get constant invites, but particularly two of us, myself and Rusty Rumley, who's one of our two senior staff attorneys. We do the most predominant traveling, not exclusive to us. Other staff attorneys do travel to do presentations, but this is something we do a lot of, and to a lot of different audiences. Conservation districts, that's a constant area, whether they don't, and all over the country. Congressional committee staff, that's constant. Had a meeting this morning with some committee staff on a particular issue. We do legal conferences, both speaking at them. We host some. We host one out west in the Western United States, focused on Western issues. We host another in the Mid-South. We hope in time, as our capacity grows, to be able to continue doing not only those, but to add other similar learning opportunities. Managers, farm managers, rural appraisers, women in agriculture, their national organizations, state organizations. The list goes on and on. All kinds of agribusinesses individually, their trade associations, and so forth. In the next slide, please, and I'll say one quick note. We always try to say yes to people, and we certainly always give the same question, the same answer, regardless of who's asking it. That's part of that objective mission. And every once in a while, it's rare, but every once in a while, we're already booked. We just don't have the capacity to travel for that particular time period. And when it comes to agriculture related meetings, to help kind of put a finer point on that, the easiest way to break it down is just think about when a seed goes into the ground, when it's planted, and when it's harvested. And that defines the backbone of all your agriculture related meetings around the United States. And so particularly between about right now and early February, there'll be a lot of meetings that tend to be more producer oriented. It's because we're past harvest and we're before spring planting. Once you get past mid-February or so, you start transitioning into different, like professional organizations tends to be the general trend, and then cattlemen's groups, which because of the nature of the commodity, they can have a slightly different meeting schedule. And you have attorneys, and you have all kinds of other types of meetings that occur. One of the stakeholder groups that we have that I wanted to highlight to you is students, and this is for us pre-college. It's undergraduate and law school students. Of course, we welcome any others that might fit, but those are our three broad categories. And we try to do professional development, networking, and just generally increase legal knowledge. Just yesterday, we did a webinar, and it's a partnership we have with the American Agricultural Law Association, where we did a webinar just about how to start a student association on agri-food law in your law school, why to do it, how to do it, pitfalls, and then how to maintain it if you've already had one started or if you do start one. And we're very interested in thinking long-term, building out talent into the ag industry and fostering interest from people who oftentimes were surprised to know that there were career paths in this area of the industry. And we do focus a lot of this, particularly on minority students and others who are traditionally underrepresented in both the ag and food law fields. Next slide, please. And so this is actually a part of our Growing Careers, which is part of the Bridges Initiative. October the 2nd, we'll have Deputy Secretary Torres Small, who's been just a terrific person to get to know over the last few years. I imagine a lot of you on this call not only know her and know about her, you know her background, but she's an attorney, served in the U.S. Congress, in fact, one of the largest congressional districts in the country. And of course, now she's been head of USDA Rural Development and now Deputy Secretary at USDA, and we're very honored that she'll do a presentation. It's for these students to really help them explore new angles. And I should mention Kirsten. I think it was just a month ago, did a Growing Careers webinar for us, which was well attended and well received. Next slide, please. In terms of communications, and believe it or not, I'm starting to get down toward the end of my slides. I'm talking as fast as I know how. If you want to use that QR code, I'll also put a link here in a few minutes to where you can sign up. If you're interested, we do have you can sign up for 3 different things or none, but one is our webinars. If you're interested in upcoming webinars and just knowing what they are, that's usually no more than 2 emails monthly, and we usually send one out about 1 to 2 weeks before the webinar, I think, and then one maybe the day or 2 before, something like that. I actually lose track of the pattern. Another one is our quarterly newsletter that comes out each quarter, and it's what really is our more of an administrative update to the public, where we highlight recent and upcoming activities, initiatives, and key announcements. And then the one that you see highlighted here on the screen is called the feed, and the feed comes out every 2 weeks, and it's basically, and I think our most recent one came out at 12 o'clock Eastern today, I believe. I know it came out today, and it's basically a quick rundown of legal developments in the ag and food industries, state and federal and international, from the previous 2 weeks. We try to keep each highlight to 2 to 4 sentences, and then we link to resources that we have, whether they be fact sheets or other publications or website resources, webinars, for anyone who wants to take a deeper dive and learn more. And sometimes it's announcing an upcoming resource. And I'll stress real quickly, this is written to be useful to non-attorneys and attorneys. And so, and it's just an interesting, eclectic group. And I've gone through our just trying to learn about our audience through that. It's a really dynamic, interesting group of individuals from all kinds of backgrounds that sign up for that, which we're really appreciative of, very appreciative of. Next slide, please. Research fellows, this is also part of our Bridges initiative, but these are law students that we hire from around the United States. They work remotely. We usually have anywhere from the low 20s to sometimes as many as 30. We hire these on semester by semester. These are compensated positions. I think the map you see there probably has another 2 or 3 states that we could add in, but you get the idea. One of these days, we're going to have some representation from all 50 states. We're growing there. This is an area that we've really had to work at growing and to get it to where it's at and to be as productive as it is. Next slide, please. All right, so real quickly, that was a lot about the Ag Law Center. In terms of recent and emerging issues, I would just quickly reiterate, I think the feed, if you really want to kind of keep up with key issues and in a way that's real user-friendly and like, because you can get that newsletter, you can scroll through and just say, well, this is on this issue, this is on that issue, that's not of interest. And then you may, as you scroll, take you just a minute, you can say, now this is interesting. And there'll be resources there and you can read more about that. And of course, our webinars that I mentioned and the other quarterly newsletter. But some of the issues that have really been active the last particularly year and last couple years, in no particular order, foreign ownership of agricultural land has just been a red hot issue. And just in the last couple of days or so, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a measure dealing with foreign ownership. It hasn't passed the Senate yet, so we have to wait for that part of the process. But that's the most recent federal activity. There's been like a couple dozen or more different proposals in the House and the Senate over the last couple of years. Okay, I see the warning there on my time. I've got 2 minutes. We're going to rock through this. And then at the state level, been super active. And most states have proposed laws. In fact, in a moment when we change slides, I think I can cover the rest of that in the 2 graphs I have there. Agency authority, huge issue in the ag sector because agriculture is probably the most regulated industry in the United States. There's really nothing for better or for worse. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And obviously that always depends on the beholder of what they think is good or bad. But there's really nothing that occurs in the ag industry, whether it be at the production level or all the way out to the inputs and all the way out to distribution and retail. There's nothing that doesn't touch state and federal agencies. It's just, you just can't find any meaningful examples. And so Chevron was a doctrine that gave a lot of deference by courts to agency interpretations. And just recently, the United States Supreme Court overturned that doctrine. And so that's going to be a decades-long evolution, but a massive change in the ag and in agency authority generally, but it's certainly a big one in the ag sector. Prop 12 is another one. This is really, it boils down to the state of California has some animal welfare laws that they passed, and they also passed a law that said, basically saying to raise certain animals and to be able to sell products from those animals in California, you have to produce them in these ways. But they also made that applicable to the other states and countries. And that was challenged under the Commerce Clause, or more specifically, the Dormant Commerce Clause. Like, could California constitutionally regulate interstate commerce in this way? And in essence, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling recently and said that they could. And so this really has an impact not only in the ag industry, but to commerce in general that we're going to see play out for some years to come. Big issues in the pesticide arena, from the regulatory prospects to thousands and tens of thousands of civil litigation. And then there's legal challenges to certain chemistries in the court system that seek to vacate some products that have been registered. Massive issues in that arena. And that also bring in the Endangered Species Act, and it's a new development. And in addition to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, it now brings in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the National Marine and Fisheries Service into the pesticide registration process, which is a brand new thing and a big deal. We have WOTUS, it's Waters of the United States, all kinds of things in the environmental law arena. In fact, I didn't talk much about how we staff, but we have attorneys are divided into portfolio or subject matter areas. So one of our attorneys, Bridget Rollins, her focus is all things environmental law. And then other big issues like the Farm Bill and the current Farm Bill process, which there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of interest and a lot of activity going on around it. The process is moving at a snail's pace at best at the moment, and nothing's going to happen until we get through the elections in November, and then we'll kind of come out of that dust cloud and see where we are and whether we're going to enact a new multi-year Farm Bill before the end of the calendar year, which is not likely, but is possible. Or enact an extension and then come back and try like a 1-year extension and then try immediately to pass something in the new Congress. All right, I think maybe next slide, because I think I'm at the end. Yeah, we'll just spend 20 seconds on this. The states in red, this is on foreign ownership. The states in red are states that up till December 31st, 2022 in the United States had some type of prohibition or restriction on foreign ownership. There was no such thing as a ban. States in green were states that affirmatively allowed for foreign ownership, and the states that were in blue were silent either way. So you can see the majority rule in the United States was to allow for foreign ownership. Next, and I think my final slide, please. This just gives you a quick snapshot of how much this landscape has changed. Now we're roughly half the country have had some type of foreign ownership law. And there's a lot of nuances within that. I won't go into them. More than happy to answer questions. We have tons of resources on it, and more than happy to visit with you today or afterwards on that. And I'll stop talking there.
Okay. Thank you, Harrison. You covered a lot in a really short amount of time. Good job. Now I'm going to turn it over to Laurie from the Vermont Law Graduate School.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, and thanks to you and Jamie for organizing this. And Harrison, thanks to you for being such an excellent partner in the Ag Law Partnership. Kirsten's probably going to put up our website, and I just caution you that our website is housed within Vermont Law and Graduate School's website. We are working on having our own freestanding website, which I think might make our information a little bit easier to access. But a lot of the tools and things that I'm going to talk about in my presentation today have freestanding websites that you can link to from our website. Next slide, please. So our mission at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems is to train law and policy students to develop real-world solutions for a more sustainable and just food system. Similar to Harrison, we have a really talented team of staff attorneys, research fellows, and faculty that work with our students alongside other universities, federal, state, and local government, and stakeholders across the food system. And that includes producers, workers, community-based organizations, and coalitions. All of our work is informed by the needs of stakeholders, and we really work hard to prioritize research that fills gaps in food and agricultural law and policy information. Next slide, please. So in addition to the individual resources that we develop, we also have a few major projects that I'm going to highlight today. And the first is the Healthy Food Policy Project. The Healthy Food Policy Project started as a partnership between us and Mitchell Hamlin and also the Red Center at the University of Connecticut. The mission of this project, or the goal of this project, is to identify and elevate local laws that seek to promote access to fresh and healthy food, while also contributing to strong local economies, and improved environment, and health equity, with a specific focus and emphasis on socially disadvantaged and marginalized groups. You can see a screenshot of the cover page for the site. And the site consists of a searchable policy database, that focuses on written laws and organizational policies that have been formally adopted, so not guidance, but things that have actually been formally adopted by municipal governments, such as counties, cities, towns, and villages. And even though there are so there's a whole methodology to how policies were selected in the database. And even though some excluded laws and policies might have some relevance to healthy food access and might be important, we excluded them because they didn't expressly articulate a connection to healthy food access, or they expressed a connection but didn't include enforceable or specific duties or requirements. The site also contains a few different key resources, and I highlighted some of those here. The Towards Equitable and Just Food Systems resource addresses the evolving language of food systems and policy work, and it's centered on addressing structural racism and inequity. It describes equity-focused terms and frameworks that are related to the food system, outlines how those terms and frameworks are used in food policy, and gives some examples of what they mean in practice. Another relatively new aspect of this project, of the Healthy Food Policy Project, which we're really excited about, is the Healthy Food Policy Project Consultation Lab. And food system stakeholders can submit requests for technical assistance or questions that they might have about healthy food access. One emerging trend has been questions focused on state procurement. So some people who have reached out work for state or county agencies in states where there might be an expressed goal of a certain amount of locally or regionally produced foods, including culturally appropriate foods. And we've had questions about what does that mean if it's not a mandate, and how does that actually impact state contracts to the extent that they're expressed goals and not requirements. Another trend that we've seen is stakeholders reaching out generally about how to move from community input gathering to policy making, and including how to distill policy priorities from community comments. So we have a resource that I included a snapshot of here that's focused on policy drafting. And we also have a resource that's focused on authentic resident engagement. But we're also considering how to meet this need through additional written resources and webinars. Next slide, please. We also recently released a resource focused on zoning for urban agriculture, and that provides a general overview of urban agriculture and zoning. It explains how zoning can support urban agriculture, and it considers action steps for advocates trying to facilitate urban agriculture through zoning, and explores some emerging trends. This also connects to a project we're working on with the Office of Urban Ag and Innovative Production. I think Nina's on the call today. And the goal of that project is to help urban farmers navigate policies that impact urban agriculture, and to provide resources to provide some snapshots and examples of existing urban ag policies. Next slide, please. Another one of our projects is the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit. The point of this is also a freestanding website. The point of this resource is to help farmers and landowners understand how to affordably access, retain, transfer, and conserve farmland. It offers farm seekers, farmers, landowners, and their advocates technical assistance, and it provides educational information on the legal issues that might arise when purchasing land, leasing land, and provides some in-depth case studies that display a range of creative land leasing and transfer strategies that are used around the country. One big area of focus for us has been to develop resources focused on addressing land loss and retention. We've done some of this through our heirs property work that has resulted in the creation of a number of state fact sheets addressing heirs property issues, in addition to co-hosted conferences and training in partnership with heirs property practitioners across the country as part of the heirs property practitioner network. Next slide, please. Another freestanding resource is the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit. So this toolkit, we've heard a lot of really positive feedback from farmers market managers and others about the tools on this particular site. It includes legal resources intended to support resilient and accessible farmers markets through open source legal tools that keep market managers informed as they're making decisions to build and grow their markets. An important thing to note about the toolkit is that the topics that we included in this toolkit were selected in response to recurring questions from farmers market managers. Some of those questions were how business structure would affect their organization. So we have some resources on entity formation, what types of legal risk exist in this context and how to manage them, and how to make products available and accessible for all community members. So the website includes legal resources, best practice recommendations, and case studies for farmers market leaders on selecting and enhancing business structures, accepting SNAP benefits, and managing common risks. Two of the recent additions to this site I did screenshots of over to the side, are focused on employment classifications and volunteers, because we had a lot of questions about when does a volunteer become an employee and how to classify various groups of employees. So we developed a couple resources focused on that to help market managers navigate those questions. We also recently had a consultant evaluate the site through sets of stakeholder interviews, surveys, and outreach that both address the existing content and what stakeholders hoped for new content. So we're really excited to begin the work of responding to the recommendations we received from stakeholders through the evaluators. Next slide, please. This is another one of our freestanding resources, the Labels Unwrapped site. This actually started as a project with a group of students that I had in my food regulation and policy class who felt like it was absurd to have to go to law school and learn about the food label. So we started putting together as a class content for this particular site, and the site has really evolved over time and just recently had a refresh a few years ago. The point of it is really to demystify the food label and to provide information in hopefully an accessible way for people to be able to understand what different language on the food label means, which things are voluntary versus which things are mandatory. And for the things that are voluntary, what's the law, if there is any, that addresses that particular claim that might be on a label. So if you go through the site, you're able to click through on different terms on a food label to see what those things mean. There's some really basic information about the USDA's authority relative to food labeling versus FDA's authority. And then there's also an issue briefs section that explores hot topics and novel issues related to food labels. We have a student right now that's working on an issue brief related to the use of label claims related to regenerative agriculture, which I know the USDA is very interested in at the moment. Next slide, please. So this final set of slides, I have a bunch of new releases just to give you all a sense of work where stakeholders reached out and asked for some additional research focused on certain issues. So the Appealing for Relief resource is an analysis of appealed direct farm loan decisions from 2009 to 2022. We worked really closely with the Farm Service Agency on this particular resource. There were many calls to to talk through some of the challenges and some of the existing challenges. And we also worked alongside stakeholder groups to help develop this resource. So it really was a great collaboration between stakeholders and FSA. Next slide, please. We also recently, within the past couple months, just released this report as part of our Farm and Energy initiative, which is housed within our Institute for Energy and the Environment, that's focused on policy opportunities for beneficial electrification on the farm. Energy is not necessarily my area of expertise, but this particular report, I think, really breaks down in really accessible ways opportunities that that farm owners can tap into and people who are farming can tap into beneficial electrification. Next slide, please. We also just recently released this resource focused on food systems resilience planning and the climate crisis, defining concepts and terminology. And Lelani Nelson, who was one of the co-authors of this report, is actually on our call today. Also, this is part of a series of reports that's focused on food systems resilience. We worked on this in partnership, at least to vet the issues to be covered with a number of stakeholders across the food system, and are planning to release additional resources that are focused on food system resilience in response to stakeholder requests and needs. Next slide, please. This precarious protection report, you heard Harrison mention that there are a lot of questions and a lot of litigation around pesticides. This report is focused on compliance with pesticide regulations for farm worker safety. It's a really in-depth report. We worked on it with partners at Farm Worker Justice and the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. And Emma Scott, who is one of the authors on this report, just recently came to be the director of our Food and Agriculture Clinic. So that's very exciting for our students, but this is also part of an ongoing partnership with Farm Worker Justice to provide resources on areas where farm worker advocates have specifically requested some additional research on law and policy in action. Next slide, please. And so here's just, this might be small for you. It looks pretty small for me. These are some of our smaller resources that came out. A couple I talked about earlier. What is country of origin labeling is an issue brief that's on our Labels Unwrapped site. We have some resources focused on gleaning and value-added products, a guide for food hubs on food safety compliance, some of our farmers market fact sheets, which I referenced earlier on employment classifications and volunteers, a resource focused on land use tools to protect pollinators. And then we recently updated a guide that we had developed in partnership with Migrant Justice, an organization that's focused on the rights of dairy workers in Vermont, that addresses housing and employment rights for Vermont dairy workers. And I think that is my last slide besides the question slide. Yeah, thanks, Jamie.
Okay. Thank you, Laurie and Harrison. That was a lot of good information. One of the things I really like about our partnership is how you each have your own kind of niche and what you work on, and it is so complementary. And so I feel like together, this is a lot of really great agricultural law information for everyone on the call, for policymakers, for the public, and for everyone. Just a reminder to everyone on the call, you can enter a question in the chat, which I can read, or if you want to come off of mute and put your camera on, you're welcome to ask. I do have one question that I wanted to ask you to talk about, Laurie, briefly. Well, so both you and Harrison, I think Harrison, you mentioned heirs property and that's been a focus of content on both of your websites. And I'm not sure that everyone knows what that is. So Laurie, I was wondering, can you briefly explain what heirs property is and how it has impacted the agricultural landscape over the last many years, many decades?
Sure. I'm not going to be able to give you like very concrete, specific data points, but I can talk about what heirs property is, generally speaking. So heirs property is when someone dies without a will and the property is left to multiple heirs. And then it's difficult to sort out and often results in conflict and sometimes can result in the loss of land. It's been a huge issue for Black land loss in particular. And it's been a huge issue for the loss of farmland in particular. So we've been working on heirs property issues in partnership. Fran Miller, who works with us as a staff attorney, most specifically has been working on heirs property in partnership with a number of practitioners, advocates, other universities across the country to be able to provide resources, but also just to train lawyers that this is an issue that exists, because it's not an issue that a lot of attorneys are familiar with or even necessarily know how to navigate.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully, for those that don't know, that gives you a little bit of information. Certainly, you can click some of the websites that I posted in the chat if you want to know more. Harrison, I had a question for you based on what you talked about. Oh, and then we'll get to one that's in the chat. So you had mentioned that it was unlikely but possible that the Farm Bill will be passed in the next couple of months. If it doesn't pass, you mentioned that there would be an extension. How does that work? And I know we have a lot of USDA employees on the call. How does that impact USDA?
Okay, so and I'll be optimistic enough to say there would at least be an extension, but if we're being technical, we say there could be an extension. I mean, Congress does have to take that action. And before I get to the heart of what your question was there, Congress has just come back from the August recess. If anybody, most people aren't nerdy watching the congressional developments every day. I watch it literally. It's like one of the first things I do every morning. And they're trying to get an appropriations bill done, and for the same sort of paradigm of reasons that we've had such struggles in recent cycles. Speaker Johnson had to pull the bill back, lack of consensus even within his own party to be able to have the numbers to pass it. And then what they're trying to pass might not pass and likely wouldn't pass the Senate. That's almost impossible at this stage that it would pass the Senate. The reason I mentioned that, really can't get to the Farm Bill until we work through this appropriation stuff. And so every delay on the appropriation side increases the difficulty and the challenges of getting a Farm Bill done, even if the political will is there before the end of the year. So now the question about what becomes so the Farm Bill, it's, you're talking several hundred to 1,000 pages of legislation. It's typically the easiest way to think of it is reauthorization. So it's reauthorizing a lot of pre-existing programs, some of which go back to and around the Great Depression era. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a simple, it could be a different answer depending on the provisions at play. But in many respects, if a program needs to be reauthorized and the Farm Bill expires, and certainly expires long enough, particularly with price and income support, you start getting into some pretty weird stuff. And there's a lot authorities, even for USDA and different agencies, that if their authority is not, if it expires because it wasn't reauthorized, you have some things just sitting there in limbo. The bigger question to me for USDA would be the appropriations process. So we've been on continuing resolutions for so many years now that we've forgotten what that regular order used to be done and was done for decades and decades. And so that's actually, from operationally, that's a much more burning issue. They're both extraordinarily important, right. But because you can get into another government shutdown if we don't get one passed, and we're not that far away from that timeline. It's not likelihood of a shutdown, but it's not a great signal when the speaker puts a bill out with confidence and then retracts it and says, we got to go build consensus. So.
Okay, thank you. I do see there is a question in the comments. I'll read it about on foreign ownership. Do you know how a buyer, a corporate entity, let's say, who is majority owned by a foreign entity is vetted? This seems like a primary backdoor of farmland coming under indirect control by a foreign power, often not necessarily in the best interest of US food production.
Two ways you have to look at that. Look at federal, you have to look at state. At the federal level, there really is no prohibition on foreign ownership. Now, there is a reporting law, the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act. And if you don't comply with it and you were supposed to as a foreign person.
USDA logo, United States Department of Agriculture.